Welcome to Sign of the Times, a program that is geared to give you some insight to the situations that are going on around the world, as well as the things that are going on and have been going on since our instruction given by the Torah has been implemented into this earth, and how those things, those issues that are of today are affecting and being affected by you understanding the teachings of the Torah. The Torah is a book that was described and given as instructions from the Creator of heaven and earth. And at this point, when we begin to look at these days, we find ourselves in situations that are relative to the words that were spoken way back during the days of Moshe ben Aram, and what he spoke on has given us a sense of understanding knowledge that would enable us to try to sift out and overcome the present situation of today. Today, I would like you to go around and get all your children, because it's very important that they are connected basically really with the earth and with understanding of what's missing in our society, which is a reconnecting them back with the Creator of the heaven and the earth. So I would want you to go around and get all the children that you can and sit them down at this table this evening. And relative to today's world, we're in the month of February, which around the country, people are calling and celebrating and remembering Black history. History that has been hard to define, but yet many of the times there are things spoken, and we haven't been educated enough to the point where we have many Black archaeologists and those who go around searching to find out what the excavations, and looking at the excavations that they've discovered, to put their name on it and put a dot on it saying, well, this is something that we discovered or something that we thought about. But because of confusion, many times the historians, who are really the historians, right, are overlooked. So I'm going to try today my best to give some enlightenment to why situations are the way they are and how we can come out of it. Today, my being here with Dr. Elder Fry, who also is a former archaeologist or one who has taught archaeology at Emory University. So, Dr. Fry, how are you today?
I'm fine.
What do you see in today's world, and how the situations that you see in the world today, how are they relative to the things that we've talked about many times from the scriptures?
The scriptures have, in both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, they have a lot of things to say about prophecy for the end times. That's a period of time in human history when conditions on earth between people will become worse than they ever have been in the past. As those of you who remember your high school history and so forth, there have been some pretty bad times in the world. Wars almost continuously somewhere in the world. but the prophecies go further than just telling what's going to happen in the ancient past. They go to telling about what's going to happen in this one short period of time that gets to a state where Satan has been released and the wars are greater and the illnesses are greater and everything is worse than it has ever been before. And before this period of time is over, it'll be worse than anything and everything that will follow it. Fortunately, it's a short period of time, one generation, which at the present time, the lifetimes of the average people that are alive today, a generation is probably something between 100 and 125 years for the longest lived people. And so these last days, this last generation, has been going on since not too long after the end of the First World War. The First World War ended in 1918 with the victory of the United States didn't get into the First World War until almost the end. It was a war between England and France and the other Western European countries fighting the Germans and the Austrians and some of the further eastern countries, and especially Turkey was allied with Germany and so forth. And so that was the really significant thing in the First World War, was that the Turkish army was defeated, and the outcome of the First World War was to change some of the territories that the Ottoman Turkish Empire had gotten over the years, and they were taken away from the Turkish Empire. They destroyed the empire, and various other things happened. And one of the things that happened was Israelites started to go back into the territory that they had occupied in ancient times.
And that had to do with the development of the state of Israel.
That's right. In the talk of that time, Palestine was the name given to what's Israel now, and so it was occupied by Palestinians, Islamic people, and because Great Britain was particularly interested in preserving and helping to reestablish Israelites in their land. The last battles were between the British Army and the Turkish Army, led by German generals. And the God of Israel was behind them, because in that war, that last war between the English army on the Eastern Front and the Turkish army, the English victory was so decisive that it came to be called one of the most complete victories in the history of human warfare, of the British Army over the Turkish army.
One of the things that I would like to talk about today, because you see, we've heard history and we've studied history, and we usually talk about Israel. And many times we talk about Israel and we deal with it mostly from a European standpoint of view. We deal with history talking about what happened in Germany, what happened during the Exodus, during the Inquisition. And many times the pictures that we've seen, right, are depicting European history. And there's very little connection left there with understanding some of the black history that is involved and that has been involved for many centuries. So today, what I want to attempt to do to open your mind to certain things, as I said earlier, we are in the month of February. And in February, it has become a national thing to celebrate black history all around the country. And
there are even laws that make it a holiday in Georgia. And the United States in general. It's a national holiday.
And a national understanding. And when we approach it, we only approach with such things that happened during the marches, the King, Malcolm X. We talk about a little about those issues. And very seldom do we bring about an understanding such as a recent happening, let's say in the early 60s or late 60s and early 70s, a movement that left the country going back to the land of Israel. And these men who did this and left proclaiming themselves and acknowledging themselves as being the children of Israel. And they say that this was part of their land. So I want to attempt today to talk about some of these people, because when we talk about black history, they're not mentioned, okay? And when we talk about European history, they're not mentioned. But we do connect the Europeans up with being the descendants of the children of Israel. But there's very little information about those who are here in this country that are truly connected with the children of Israel. And it's important that we understand that, because a long time ago, a man by the name of Moshe ben Amram spoke to the elders of Israel who he had led out of the land of Egypt, and he sat them down and he gave them some decrees that the Creator spoke to him, telling them if they didn't take heed to their ways, if they didn't follow the instruction that he was giving them, that they would be scattered to the four corners of the earth. And I want to talk about that very seriously today, because what happened is, in the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy explains certain things. And in the last portion of the book of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, it spoke to these words, starting at the 63rd verse. It said, just as the Lord has rejoiced over you and has done such wonderful things for you and has multiplied you, so that Yah at that time will rejoice in destroying you also if you don't take heed to the instruction, and thou shalt disappear from the land. Yah will scatter you among all the nations, and from one end of the earth to the other, there you will worship heathen gods that neither you nor your ancestors have known. Gods made of wood and stone. There amongst these nations you shall find no rest. But Yah will give you a trembling heart, darkness of bodies, and wasted from sorrow and fear. Your lives will hang in doubt. You will live night and day in fear, and will have no reason to believe that you will see the morning light. In the morning you will say, oh, that God that night wished it was night. And in the evening, you wish it was day. You were never satisfied. It pretty much reminds me of what's going on today. I was in a bank today, and the young lady was sitting there, and a guy walks in, he's got a gun on a strap on the side. And it put fear in her mind, because how the state of this country has now become, where young men are walking around with guns, concealed and unconcealed, okay? But it's put such fear in a woman's mind, had to make me stop to think and say, wow, this is crazy, because it almost put us back into the Western days, going when the country when taking this country became the rule, and the gold rush became the flux, where cowboys carried guns. So we're back at that state again. But I bring this point because what is happening in our society today, when we look on the news, we're describing everything that Moses is talking about here in the book of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. You would live in fear, in doubt. And these things are happening literally. Okay? So, but in the final analysis, one of the things that describes and lets you understand what Moses was talking about back then, in the 68th verse, it said, then Yah will send you back to Egypt. By what? Back into Egypt. Egypt meaning slavery. And then he said, in ships. Now, I recall Israel going in and out of bondages, but most of those bondages, they were carried by caravan. They went to Assyria by caravan. They went to Babylon by caravan. But here it mentions that they would be carried in ships. Then Yah will send you back to Egypt in ships, a journey I promised you would never see, to make again. And there will you offer to yourselves, to your enemies, as slaves, but no one will even want to buy you. That's like going down to ask for a job. You go and ask for a job in a country that you're in, and nobody, you don't own anything, so you can't go to your man to say, hey, give me a job. So now you got to go to someone else seeking jobs, seeking a means of survival. That sounds pretty much to me like what was being talked about here. Because if you don't own nothing, what is it worth for you? You're not gaining anything by anything that you make. Okay? So, but along with that, the history of black history has been shown forth for a number of years concerning what happened to the blacks that came up out of the slave trade here in America. And we talk about the NAACP, we talk about Slick, and we talk about the various movements, the Elijah Muhammad movement, the Muslim movement. We talk about the nationalist movement, the Panther Party, and things of that nature. But you never hear an open history, though this history is being portrayed on Comcast many years, about people who claim to recognize themselves as being inheritance of these traditions that are in the Bible or in the Torah. And those people are called the children of Israel. When we begin to understand that, here's a bunch of people calling themselves Israel decide, well, we're going back to Israel. And they went back. The leader, Ben-Amin Carter, who just recently passed away, never really got the recognition that he should have gotten, because black history in the Black History Month is valuable as it has become to blacks here in America. He has not been accepted into that arena or even looked at as being part of black history. And I think this is a fault. Along with that, there are many other men, any other young people who came along in those days, starting back when we talk about today, we talk about, in Chicago particularly, we talk about Beth Shalom and we talk about Ben Azaki. I've heard recent understandings of the mergers that were made, okay? But do we go back to understand where did these people come from? Where did they get this information from? We can go all the way back to one gentleman by the name of Joshua Ford, who was a friend of Marcus Garvey. And he established in his day and time one of the first black Ethiopian congregations. You never probably heard of him. Huh? He left and went from there to live in Ethiopia. Can you get a focus on this picture? Can you draw in and get a focus on this picture? This is Arnold Ford, as his name was then, and later changed to Joshua Ford. Along with him, of course, there was another gentleman in those days who began a teaching and an instruction concerning black history that was never being brought up or mentioned, was Rabbi Wadsworth Matthews. Now these men came up believing in a God, believing in their relationship with Israel, and beginning to worship and to return back to the God that Moses was talking about way back close to 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And they are claiming to be the children of Israel. Unfortunately, when it comes to black history, they haven't been mentioned in the arena. So what I'm going to attempt to do today is to bring out some of these men who've been around since the early 20s, who had insight to instructing, such as Rabbi James Bullen. Rabbi Poinsett. Now when I say rabbi, that means teacher, instructor. That means there was something going on in this country where educational process was going on that never came to the forefront, that has been overlooked for many years. And in black history, I think these are some of the things that need to be brought to the front, because these people are claiming to be what? The children of Israel, to which Elder Fryer was talking about, that there was an establishment of the return of Israel back to the land of Israel. And people were being gathered from all countries, particularly European countries, claiming to be the children of Israel. I don't doubt that they are, but what I'm saying is there's an element that has been left out, and when we talk about black history, we find out that there's a lot of things that went on in this country that was never publicized as part of black history. Yet this history was going on amongst blacks in Harlem, in Chicago, in California, in the South, in this country, in Georgia itself. There were many congregations and many men who've been teaching their connection with the children of Israel for centuries, but it's not included in black history. I wonder why. They haven't been told that these men also went and attained scholastic educations. They have doctorates and masters, right? Mm-hmm. They attended some of the schools such as Harvard, such as Cornell. They attended different schools that gave them a document establishing their status quo and where they belong. But their acknowledgement and recognizing that they were the children of Israel has not been publicized. And we have not included that in black history. So how do we begin to approach these things? So what I'm tempted to do today is try to go through just a few men who developed and who have been behind the scenes. These men have operated with other black men who were noted, such as Percy Sutton, such as, when we look and we begin to see Charlie Rangel. And they knew about these men, such as Rabbi Matthews, who established an Ethiopian congregation following behind Rabbi Ford. Historically, you may be questioning, well, what is he talking about? Well, I'm talking about some black history that has not been made black history amongst the month that we call black history. And those men have been totally overlooked. In the early days in Brooklyn, New York, there was a place established. And the place was called the Tabernacle of Israel. We have a Tabernacle of Israel here. I attend that congregation. Huh? How many people know about that congregation? How many people know how to connect to that congregation to Signs of the Times? Very few.
Very few.
So, and we've been around with Signs of the Times for how many years?
Oh, going on more than 15, I guess.
More than 15 years. But that has not been part of what we call black history. Why? So today I'm trying to bring about some information that will help you to understand there's a whole educational process of black history and black historians and black teachers that have been going on in this country since the early 20s and the beginning of the 19th century. Some of those people to which headed and belonged to the Tabernacle of Israel, which was in New York, a place at 310 Tompkins Avenue, Brooklyn, were men who began to hear about the God of Israel. And they began to search and try to find out some information about this God. Of course, they were the outcasts. They were separated. They were overlooked. But they had a connection. They brought the Spirit of Yah back into focus. And some of these men, such as Rabbi David Bradshaw, High Priest Emmanuel, or Priest Emmanuel, Prince Yaakov, all hailing out of Messianic congregations, incidentally. The Tabernacle of Israel was a Messianic congregation. But Prince Yaakov headed a congregation later that became known as Ben Azakim, Sons of the Ancient. In Tompkins Avenue, but they all came out of the Tabernacle of Israel, a Messianic congregation, mind you. Out of them also came Overseer McCoy, Prince Elkanah, Nabi Yash Adams, who later started Beth Absalom, a congregation in Brooklyn, Priest Michelle, Priest Yaman, Prince Elkanah, Moreh Yoel, Tibiak, who taught the Hebrew language and taught it very well. There was Canna Brooks, who taught canting, to which even the Jewish community hasn't even recognized. Priest Shabbathai, Prince Doberski, Prince Namuel, Priest Standback, King David, Priest Simeon, Prince Eleazar, and Nabi Raphael. I want to talk about Nabi Raphael a little bit. Because Nabi Raphael became a union leader. And your holiday, what we call King's Day, right, got very well supported from Nabi Raphael, but to black history, this has not even been publicized. Hasn't been told. Okay? But Nabi Raphael, Nabi meaning prophet, Raphael, became a union leader. He became one of the founders of, at that time he was the District 65 Labor Union. And then he went from 65 Labor Union to the Teamsters. And some of the movements, the King movement, some of the times the security came through him. Black history that was not taught, that we don't have a clue to. But this Nabi Raphael and Priest Yaman and Priest Michelle and Prince Yaakov and Prince Abner started a place called Ben Azakim, meaning the sons of the ancients. Let me see if we can get a clear picture of this. And all of them hailed from a place called the Tabernacle of Israel, a Messianic congregation, incidentally. These men brought about other congregations, such as Beth Absalom. And then we look at Rabbi Matthews, who started an organization. And we look at Ben Azakim, to which Prince Yaakov, picture of Prince Yaakov. See, I want us to stop and think about black history. And black history, if we don't tell the story, involves us all. It involves Georgia, it involves New York, it involves all around the country where blacks live. And any story that you got, or any issue that you have, that you participated in, you've all suffered some of the struggle that the book of Deuteronomy was talking about. We're suffering about it right now. And because we haven't established this reconnection to the God of Israel, we find ourselves stuck with what is happening, the mayhem that's happening around us. These men, such as Prince Yaakov, attempted to go out in the street, to redirect the gangs in the street, to get them back with a focus of understanding that you don't move without the breath and the help of God, help of Yah, the creator of heaven and earth. We had Ali Ben Azakim. We had a few more pictures that could be shown. We had Chief Cain and his wife, Princess Miriam. Now, you hear these terms, princes, and here we have Prince Shirishadai, and we have Chief Yahshua. So you may say, where did they get these names? These are titles of leadership, titles of that they had some understanding of some history and some understanding of the God of Israel. But you don't hear about them when it comes to black history. But these people existed. Chief Simeon, who originally was raised in Chicago and then came to New York and established a congregation and worked with Ben Isaacwin as a chief leader. A historian, to be a fact. Caleb, Daniel, read the book Daniel. Read the book Daniel, and those days talked about what? Read the book, study the book, know what you're talking about. But this is not included in black history. We have in Atlanta, the original head of the Tabernacle of Israel in Atlanta, a brother by the name of Daniel, who also many years ago you would see sitting in the seat that I'm sitting in right now, only because I joined with them to go and do what Yah has commanded us all to do, bring the forefront. So all this is part of black history that is not being told, is not being established. Why isn't it being established? Because the focus that should be, the focus of reconnecting with the Creator, right, would begin to change the conditions and change the situations of our understanding. See, when you don't have an identity, you might do anything. A lion might act like a tiger if he didn't have an identity of being a lion. Huh? So when we begin to see that from this perspective, right, if you're walking around with all the Christian teaching and the mayhem that's going on from New York to Chicago and the foolishness that's going on with killing each other, something hasn't taken effect. And what hasn't taken effect is the information of taking you back to the Creator of heaven and earth, who, mind you, was the guide to the one we call Moshiach, or Yahshua ben Yosef, or to you, Jesus. So it's important that we begin to look at these things and begin to turn back to them and begin to seek things out. Fortunately, I have a little picture here of me in those early days, trying to bring to Israel and to blacks the history of black people, their true history, and who they belong to, their identity. What's lacking with these youngsters in the street, they're seeking out identities, Crips, Bloods, all the various names that they're gravitating to. They are missing the identity which was given to them by the Creator, which was to bring them back. Now it's time to introduce this again, and to introduce Israel, and to introduce the blacks that are in this country, that are part of black history, that have done things to bring things about that would have, that established what black history is, really, when I begin to think about it. So I've gone through these books and this information to just provide for you an understanding that there have been many educators in America that have set up schools, that have set up teachings, that lead you back to understanding man has a relationship with who? With the Almighty Creator of the heaven and earth. One of them was such as Rabbi Levi ben Levi, who founded the Israelite Board of Rabbis and school that taught many of these other rabbis who came up later, got their teaching and instruction from. They established what we call, again, the Israelite Rabbinical Academy. I know you didn't know that existed, did you? Huh? There was an academy, a rabbinical academy, established by black historians, people who were part of what? Black history. I wonder how come it's not a publicized thing. Huh? Each of these men set out to do things that were identifying and giving back to the children of Israel their identity and reconnecting them back with their Creator. Out of Bessalom ben Zakim, there was also, who joined together in Chicago, Rabbi Fournier, incidentally, who was a cousin to Michelle Obama. That's some history you still did not know. I wonder why. So it brings back to the story. If you won't listen to Yah, your God, and won't obey these laws I am giving you today, then all these curses shall come upon you. Curses shall you be in the city. Would you say blacks are cursed in the city? Huh? In the field, cursed is your fruit and your bread. Cursed is your barren wombs. Cursed is upon your crops. Cursed is upon your fertility and your cattle, your flocks. Cursed when you come in. You got to pay money to get born, right? And when you die, you got to pay money to die. That's a curse. For Yah himself will send his personal curse upon you. You will be confused, lacking identity. Ain't that confusion? A failure in everything you do, until at last you are destroyed because of the sin of forsaking the Creator of heaven and earth. Thou shalt have no other gods beside him. So, as we speak and we look at black history today, there are many issues and many things that have transpired in the mode of things to identify black history. This year, I say that we need to go to look at the entire list of black history. When we talk about Joshua Ford, and we begin to talk about Marcus Messiah Garvey, we got these groups that are around the country that tomorrow, next week, they're going to be talking about Malcolm, they're going to be talking about Marcus Garvey. But did they know the affiliation and what they transpired, and did they know the people that surrounded these men? What understanding that they had and what training they had in knowing black history, knowing that they were black and that they were somebody. They had an identity. They had found their identity. Women, such as the late from the Tabernacle of Israel, the late Ima Elder, Supreme Mother Messiah, Princess Naomi, and Sister Helena, Priest Emmanuel and his wife Imazella, who incidentally is around today. So
with a birthday soon.
Her birthday was last week.
Last week. Yeah.
Last week. So there's so much black history that's not being brought to the forefront that we need to get into. Because maybe then we begin to find a direction and know to whom we belong and where we have to return, what we have to return to. Because he said once all those curses fall upon us, that if we bethink ourselves in the land that we were sold to and return unto me with your whole heart, bringing your children with you, grab them by the ear, bring them. Huh? Then he would return unto us and remove us out of those situations, take us out of the land that has us bound with a lack of understanding, with not knowing your history, with being divided on issues, social issues. We can dispel the Willie Lynch syndrome that has kept us in the position that we're in to this day. I want to also speak about some of the other congregations, weddings of Raphael and his daughter. Raphael's daughter being married to a young man by the name of Kashim. Kashim was one of those who sought Torah, being taught by Priest Emmanuel, who frequented our congregation. Being taught by him, and he began to step further into trying to reconnect to the Jewish movement that has been going since 1948, the return of Jews. And so he elevated himself, and he began training and learning and converting into a subculture to find and to display his own culture and his own understanding of his relationship with the creator of heaven and earth. In this picture, you can get that. This picture depicts where Raphael, Nabi Raphael, is doing what? Supporting and making statements. And I'll read it as it says. Tate tells 45,000 marchers America needs a king's holiday. So that means there's some parts of black history that you walk around and you celebrate King's holiday. You celebrate it because of men like this who were behind the scenes, who were never brought to the front to be understood that they were part of the black history and black history today too. Kashim, his son-in-law, as I was talking, who converted and went on to try to rear his children in yeshiva. This information has not been privy to the world as part of black history. And for years, as I've seen history, as I myself fought to see certain things, black history being established, but the understanding of this part of black history has not been brought or exercised. We've seen congregations, we've seen them on the TV programs, but they never presented themselves as part of the black historical factors of this land. And I think that today this needs to be reevaluated. And I think that this needs to be approached because they just might have a solution to the crime problem the problem in the street. They just might have the solution to the family's destruction. They might have a reconnection to God, because I think we all need God back here, or Yah back here in this earth, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would say so.
And I'm not incidentally leaving Elder out, but as it is, there's some information, and Elder has been here trying to educate those who are watching to the world scene and the things that are going on in the time that we're in, the last days. When we talk about signs of the time, there are signs of the time. And these are signs of the time.